Hey everyone, welcome to part 36 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we will start creating the experience and level up system. So here you can see we have a progress bar showing the current XP of the player Pokemon. And if I beat this Pokemon, then after the Pokemon faints, I'll gain some XP and you can see the XP bar is updated. So let's look at how to implement this.
Special thanks to all my Patreons for making the series possible. By becoming a Patreon, you can support me in the making of the series and get access to some cool rewards like the complete project files of the series, which also contains some advanced features that are not covered here. So let's start the video.
So to implement the level up system, we need to add two more variables to our Pokemon base class. So the first one is base XP, which is also called XP yield. So this is used to calculate how much XP a Pokemon should gain when it defeats this Pokemon. Okay. So the second variable is growth rate. So this is used to determine how fast this Pokemon will level up. Alright. So first I'm going to add the base XP and use it to calculate the XP gain when a Pokemon faints. So in our Pokemon base class, I'll add another integer and call it XP yield. So now, whenever an enemy Pokemon faints, the player Pokemon should gain some XP. And we can use this value to calculate the XP gain. So in our battle system script, let's look at how we are handling fainted Pokemons. So there are two cases when a Pokemon can faint. So one is inside the run move. The Pokemon can faint when it takes an attack. And the other case is when the Pokemon takes a damage from a status condition like burn or poison. Okay. So right now there are two areas where we are handling the Pokemon fainted logic. One is over here and the other one is in the run move. Okay. So one problem with this is we'll have to calculate the XP gain from both these areas, which will lead to code duplication. So to prevent that, I'll encapsulate this logic into a separate function. So I'll create a new function called handle Pokemon fainted, and this function is going to be a coroutine, and it will take the fainted unit as the parameter. Okay, so now we just have to copy these lines of code into our newly created function, and inside this function, instead of the target unit, we should use a fainted unit, right? So I'll rename all these variables to fainted unit. Okay, so now all we have to do is when a Pokemon faints, we just have to call the handle Pokemon fainted coroutine. Okay, and for the fainted unit, I'll pass my target unit, and since this is coroutine, I'll use heal return. Okay, so let's also do that in the run after turn. So here there is an extra line which is used to make this coroutine wait. So we don't want to touch that, but we can remove all these lines and replace it with our handle Pokemon fainted function. Okay, so in this case, we have to pass the source unit as the fainted unit. Alright, so now we just have to add the experience gain logic in just one place, which is inside this function. So let's do that. So if the fainted Pokemon is actually an enemy Pokemon, then the player Pokemon should gain some XP, right? So what I'll do is I'll check if the fainted unit is not a player unit, which means it's an enemy unit. And in this case, the player unit should gain some XP. And after that, we'll check if the player unit has gained enough XP to level up. All right. So first let's implement the XP gain. So to calculate the XP gain, first we need the XP yield of the fainted Pokemon. Okay, so we can get that from the XP yield property that we just created. I guess we forgot to create the property. So let's go back to Pokemon base. So yeah, we have the variable here, but we forgot to create the property. So let me also create a property for it. Okay. So now we can get the XP yield from the property. And I'm just going to store it in a variable. So next we need the level of the fainted Pokemon. So we can get that from fainted unit dot Pokemon dot level. And finally, if the fainted Pokemon is a trainer Pokemon, then we'll have more XP gain compared to that of a wild Pokemon. Okay, so I'll create a variable called trainer bonus. And if it's a trainer Pokemon, then the trainer bonus will be 1.5, and otherwise it'll be 1. So all we have to do is to check if this is a trainer battle, and in that case trainer bonus will be 1.5, and otherwise it'll just be 1. So now we can use these three values to calculate the XP gain. So I'll say XP gain equal to XP yield into enemy level into trainer bonus. Okay, and I'll just divide it by 7. So since trainer bonus is a float, we have to make sure to convert it back into an integer. So I'm going to use mathf.floatInt. All right, so this is the formula to calculate the XP gain. So you can read more about this formula in Bolopedia. There are actually a lot more variables like lucky egg, affection, and all, but I'm just going to use these three variables since we haven't implemented any of those. All right, so now we have calculated the XP gain. So next, we should add the XP gain to the current XP of the Pokemon. But right now we don't have any variables to store the current XP. So if you go inside our Pokemon class, you can see that we don't have any variable to store the current XP. So what I'll do is I'll create a property called XP, and we have to initialize this variable from our init function. So how can we initialize this variable? So right now we know the current level of the Pokemon, and we can use the current level in order to calculate the current XP. Alright, so this is where the growth rate comes in. So let's look at the different growth rates in the Pokemon games. So in Bolopedia, you can see that we have different growth rates like erratic, fast, medium, slow, slow, etc. So each growth rate has a function which we can use to calculate the amount of XP that is required to be at a certain level. Okay, so in this formula, N is actually the level and this is the XP. So let's say our Pokemon has a medium fast growth rate. So in this case, if the Pokemon is at level 10, then the XP required for that Pokemon to be at level 10 will be equal to 10 cube. Okay, so 10 cube is 1000. So it means the Pokemon needs an experience of 1000 in order to reach level 10. So you can read more about this in Bulbapedia, and I'm only going to implement the fast and medium fast growth rates. You can go through all these and implement every one of this. So coming back to initialize the XP, we can use the formula from the growth rate of this Pokemon to find the XP that is required to be at this level. Okay, so first let's add the growth rate to our Pokemon base class. So I'll create an enum called growth rate, and I'm only going to implement the fast and the medium fast growth rate, and let's add it as a variable in our class. We'll also create a property to expose it. So next we need to implement the formula for both growth rates. So what I'll do is I'll create a public function called get xp for level, and this function will take the level of the Pokemon and it will return the XP required to be at that level. Okay, so if the growth rate is fast, then the formula is 4n cubed by 5, and if the growth rate is medium fast, then the formula is n cubed. So I'll check if the growth rate is fast, then the formula is 4 into n cube. So n is the level divided by 5. Okay, so it's 4 n cubed by 5. And otherwise, if the growth rate is medium fast, then the formula is just n cubed. So similarly, you can implement the formula for all the other growth rates. You can get all the formulas from Bulbapedia. And by the way, if the growth rate is not any of these, then we'll just return -1, indicating that it's an error and the growth rate doesn't exist. So next, let's use this function to initialize our XP from the init function. So I'll call base dot get XP for level, and for the level I'll just pass my level variable. Okay, so now let's say the initial level of our Pokemon is 10. Then in the init function we will initialize the XP accordingly. Alright, so now let's go back to the XP gain calculation, and after calculating the XP gain we just have to add it to our current XP, right? So below this I'll just say player unit dot Pokemon dot XP plus or equal to XP gain. Alright, so we have incremented the current XP by the XP gain, and then we can just show a dialog like the Pokemon has gained this much amount of XP, just like in the Pokemon games. So now let's actually go to Unity and test if the XP gain is working properly. So first I have to set the XP yield and growth rate of all the Pokemons. So if I select a Pokemon, you can see that we have XP yield and growth rate now. So XP yield of Bulbasaur is 64. By the way, you can get the XP yield of all the Pokemons from this chart. So the XP yield of Bulbasaur is 64 and its growth rate is medium fast, I think. And I'm going to set the XP yield of rest of the Pokemons to something like 60. You can actually go through the table and set all of them correctly. So let's test if this is working. Okay, so let me try to beat the Bulbasaur. Alright, so Bulbasaur fainted and I should gain some XP. So yeah, that's working correctly. So next, after the XP gain, we need to check if we gained enough XP in order to reach the next level. Alright, but before we implement the level up, I want to create a UI in which I can show the current XP and the XP required to reach the next level. So the player can get an idea on how much XP is required to level up. So first let's go to Unity and create the UI for it. So let me enable the battle system. So we'll actually create an XP bar in the player HUD. So since we only want this in the player HUD, I'll right click on the player HUD and select unpack prefab. So now you can see the player HUD is not a prefab anymore, and the changes that we make to it will not be applied to the enemy HUD. Okay, so first I want to make this a little more big. Alright, that looks okay to me. So next I'm going to drag all the elements in the player HUD towards the top of the HUD to make space for the experience bar. Okay, I think that should be enough. So next, under the player HUD, I'll create a new game object and call it Exp UI. And then I'm going to duplicate the status text in order to create the XP text. Okay, so let me just place it inside the XP UI and then drag it down. So I'll change the text to XP and I'll change the font size to 24 and the color to black. Okay, actually I'll make it all caps. That looks better. So next I want to create the XP bar. So I'll create an image called XP bar. Okay, so I'll change its height to something small like 7.5. And let me just reposition this. And let me resize the width so that it matches the HP bar. Okay, that looks good to me. So next I'll change its anchor so that it'll stretch horizontally. And let me just change the color to something like a blue. Okay, and finally, just like we did for the HP bar, I'll change the pivot to 0. Okay, I just have to change the X pivot. And now if we change the X scale, you can see that it'll scale like a progress bar. Okay, so next I'll duplicate the XP bar to create the XP bar background. I don't know if you remember, but this is exactly how we made the HP bar. So in the case of HP bar, the green one is the progress bar and the black is the background. So similarly here, I'll set the background color of the XP bar to the same background color we used for the HP bar. So I'll just use the color picker to get that color. Okay. And the XP bar background should be above the XP bar so that the XP bar is actually shown on the top. So right now the background is not visible, but if we reduce the X scale, the XP bar will become smaller and you'll be able to see the background. Alright, so we are done with the UI. So now all we have to do is normalize our current XP so that its value is between 0 and 1, and then set that as the X scale of the XP bar. Alright, so let's write the code to do that. So in my battle HUD script, first I'll grab a reference to the XP bar. Alright, and then I'll create a public function called set XP, and in this function first I'll check if the XP bar is equal to null, and if that's the case then I'll just return and I won't try to set the XP. So this is important because only the player HUD will have the XP bar, right? The enemy HUD won't have one. So next we need to calculate the normalized XP of the Pokemon. So I'll create another function for that, and I'll call this get normalized XP. So to normalize the XP, we need the XP that is required for the current level. So I'll call it current level XP. And how can we get the XP required for the current level? We have already created a function for that in the Pokemon base class, right? So let's use that and get the XP for the current level. All right, and for the current level I'll just pass Pokemon dot level. So next we need the XP required to reach the next level. Okay, so I'll just duplicate this and call it next level EXP, and for the level I'll pass the current level plus 1. Okay, so we have got the XP required for the current level and the next level. So we have to normalize our Pokemon's current XP by using these two values. Okay, so to do that I'll say Pokemon.xp minus current level XP divided by next level XP minus current level XP. Okay, so this is the formula that is used to normalize our current XP, and I'll store this in a float variable called normalized XP. Okay, and since all these variables are integers, we need to make sure to convert it into a float. Okay, so we have calculated the normalized XP, and now we can just return it. Alright, and by the way, I'll just use a mathf.clamp function in order to make sure that the normalized XP is always between 0 and 1. Okay, so now in our set XP function, we'll call the get normalized XP function and store our normalized XP in a float variable. Alright, and finally we can set the scale of our XP bar. So I'll say XP bar dot transform dot local scale, and for the X value of the scale I'll use my normalized XP, and then I'll use 1 for Y and Z. Okay, so we have created the function to set the value for the XP bar. So let's actually call this when we set the data of the Pokemon into the HUD. So in the set data function, I'll also call set XP. Okay, so there is one more thing I want to do. So this function will set the XP instantly, right? So I want to create another function that will set the XP smoothly. So I'll copy this function and create another function called set XP smooth. And in this function, instead of setting the scale directly, we can use do tween to animate it. So I'll say XP bar dot transform dot do scale X. So we have to import dg.twinning in order to use this. So yeah, now we can use do scale X, and I want to set the scale value to normalize XP. And for the duration, let's say we want to do it in 1.5 seconds. Okay, so next I want to wait until this animation is complete. So I'll call dot wait for completion, and I'll use yield return in order to make this function wait. And obviously, if we want to use yield return, we'll have to make this a coroutine. And once we make this a coroutine, we can't simply return from it. We'll have to use yield break in order to exit the coroutine. Okay, so now let's actually call this function once the player Pokemon gains some XP. So after the XP gain, after showing the dialog, I'll call player unit dot HUD dot set XP smooth. Okay, and since this is coroutine, I'll add a yield return at the start. Alright, so let's go to Unity and test if this is working. So first we need to assign the XP bar into the HUD script of the player HUD. So I'll just drag the XP bar here. So let's just disable the battle system and try to test this. Alright, so initially you can see that the scale of the XP bar is 0. So this is because we are at level 12 and we haven't gained any experience yet. So let's try beating this Pokemon and see how it goes. Alright, so the Bulbasaur has fainted and we gained some XP, and you can see that our XP bar is showing the progress correctly. So let me try to start another battle. Okay, so now you can see that our XP bar is showing the XP that we gained from the previous battle. So let's actually try this again. So yeah, again you can see the XP bar has increased. I think we need to wait for some time before we end the battle. So at the end of this if statement, I'll add a coroutine to wait for a second. So now we'll have enough time to see that our XP has increased. So the XP gain is working properly. So I'll stop the video here, and in the next video we will implement the logic for level up. If you think the series is helpful, please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to my channel. That will really help me out. So I'll see you in the next video.